Israel begins ground operation on the Palestinian side of Rafah, and Katz warns of more annexation. Israel 28 new settlements in the West Bank. And US President Donald Trump to visit Saudi Arabia in May. And it's 4 p.m. Cairo local time, and you're watching Q News, and it's Salma Al-Fi'i. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. The Israeli occupation military has announced the start of a ground operation in the Palestinian side of Rafah, targeting the city's northern areas. The operation is part of a broader campaign to seize control of large areas within Gaza and incorporate them into what Israel calls security zones. Defense Minister Israel Katz confirmed that the military is expanding what it has named Operation Strength and Sword, with large-scale evacuations expected in the coming days. Katz also urged residents in Gaza to pressure Hamas to release Israeli detainees. According to Israeli media, the defense minister stated that parts of Gaza would be brought under direct Israeli control as part of the ongoing operations. Israeli Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir has led a settler raid on Al-Aqsa Mosque under heavy police protection. Dozens of settlers under Ben-Gvir's leadership entered the mosque in groups through the Maghrabi gate, performing provocative religious rituals. Palestinian news agency reported that Israeli forces intensified their presence around the mosque's gates and the old city, obstructing the access of worshippers to the mosque. And Egypt has strongly condemned the Israeli National Security Minister's storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque under police protection during Eid. In a statement by the Foreign Ministry, Egypt warns against continued provocative actions that violate international law and threaten regional stability. Egypt has also stressed preserving the mosque's legal status and urges global intervention to halt these violations, cautioning that to act could spark widespread unrest, jeopardizing Middle East stability and international security. Hamas has condemned the killing of a Palestinian journalist, his wife and his 3 children in an Israeli airstrike on Qnews, calling it another crime in what it described as Israel's ongoing record of aggression. In a statement, Hamas said that 209 Palestinian journalists have been killed since the start of the war, many alongside their families. The group called for urgent international action to hold Israel accountable for what it described as systematic targeting of journalists and efforts to suppress the coverage in Gaza. The Gaza government media office has announced the complete shutdown of all bakeries in the enclave, citing a month-long blockade of flour, fuel and humanitarian aid. The office condemned the situation as a deliberate starvation tactic, threatening the lives of 2.4 million Palestinians, and called for urgent international intervention, holding both Israel and the United States. Despite the severe conditions, the statement reaffirmed the resilience of the Palestinian people and their continued commitment to their land and Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has announced that Israel has officially recognized 28 new settlements in the occupied West Bank under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. During a tour with Defense Minister Smotrich, and Israeli Katz boasted record demolitions of Palestinian secure structures, calling for broader strategic measures. Katz reaffirmed its commitment to vowing to counter Palestinian settlements. The Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates has strongly condemned the incursion of Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz and far-right Finance Minister Smotrich into the occupied Palestinian territories. The ministry denounced their colonial and racist remarks, which aim to undermine Palestinian institutions as part of Israel's ongoing war on Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. It warned that such actions embolden settlers, apartheid, and the international law. And for more analysis, we now move to Rihem Morsi in our newsroom.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you so much. To help us analyze the current situation in the occupied West Bank, we're joined from Cairo by the International Relations Specialist, Dr. Mohammed Osman. Thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews.
For having me, Rihem.
So let's start off by asking, what are the legal and political implications of Israel recognizing 28 settlements in the occupied West Bank? Or somehow help these settlements from existing?
Well, international law on its own, of course, is helpless and quite useless if it's not implemented or observed by its governmental organizations. And what's happening, of course, in the world right now is that there is a complete disregard of international law and international norms, as demonstrated by the situation in occupied Palestine, whether in the West Bank or Gaza. In the case of the West Bank, Israel relentlessly expands settlement building, even though this is illegal, in accordance with international law and United Nations resolution that prohibit and even international humanitarian law that prohibit the settlement and the effectively colonization of occupied territories that do not lie within the sovereign borders of a given state. And this is the case, of course, with Israel, because the West Bank and Gaza are recognized as part of the state of Palestine. A state, even though it's under occupation, it is recognized by over 140 countries around the world and holds an observer status in the United Nations. Also is a member of a variety of international and regional organs. So it is a complete violation of international law. However, international law without it being observed and respected by the states, all the states around the world, primarily, of course, countries like the United States and Israel, the chief violators of international law in this regard, then unfortunately international law will not be of help in preventing this ongoing crime.
You brought up, sir, Gaza as well. Now, the Israeli Defense Minister, Katz, announced that there will be more expansions of the ground operation with the intention to territories to what they described as an Israeli security area or a buffer zone. Does this constitute a shift in the occupation's ultimate? As you said, will the international community somehow intervene to stop violations of international law?
It does do the overt of course, essentially the goals and the objectives of the Israeli occupation have been very clear since the beginning of this war, even though they were never explicitly announced until recently, and that is altering the geographic composition of the Gaza Strip, attempting to displace and ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip of. And this is what we are seeing now. The alarming aspect of the statements made by Israel Katz today is the admission that they seek to control parts of the Gaza Strip permanently as part of a security zone inside Gaza. And reports in the Israeli media have said that they intend to occupy from 25 to 30% of the entirety of Gaza and turn it into a security zone. By that, they ensure that whatever is left of the already destroyed and devastated Gaza will not be eligible for the sustenance of life within it. And therefore, they will try to facilitate the displacement of the Palestinians under the guise of the so-called voluntary relocation of the Palestinians to third countries. And Netanyahu directed Mossad to find third countries that are willing to receive Palestinians, unfortunately. And I think this is the plan that the Israelis are moving forward with. It might go on while the war is ongoing, and even if the war stops at some point, if a ceasefire is restored, the Israelis will keep on carrying out their attempts to displace the Palestinians. This is a textbook case of ethnic cleansing. It is an act of genocide in accordance with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. And unfortunately, the international community cannot move to do anything because the United States will always stand on the way and offer Israel absolute impunity.
Okay, if we could talk again about the occupied West Bank. What sort of impact will Ben Gvir's most recent storming of the Muslim holy sites occupied? Already volatile and tense situation in the West Bank. Violations are what led up to what's happening today in Gaza.
Of course, we can never separate the events that are going on in Gaza from those that are going on in the West Bank. It's all part of a coordinated Israeli strategy to destroy any prospect of Palestinian statehood and Palestinian nationhood inside the occupied territories. What Ben Gvir has done by storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque of the Muslims of Palestine is, of course, an outrageous move that seeks to provoke more violence on the Palestinian part in order to for them to have the in areas A and B in the occupied West Bank, which are supposedly under the control of the Palestinian Authority, and they are dismantling entire refugee camps, whether in Jenin, in Tulkarm, in Nur Shams, of course, in another act of ethnic cleansing. And let's not forget that the camps that are being dismantled by the Israelis are recognized as UNRWA refugee camps, which means that they are under the auspices of the United Nations. There, of course, Israel pays absolutely no regard to that and resumes its violations. So today, by storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the mosque, and also the vicinity of the Dome of the Rock mosques, which are very holy to the Muslim population of Palestine, it will, of course, it might provoke more violence on the parts of the Palestinians, which the Israelis will use in order to further their incessant violations of Palestinian rights in the West Bank, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, sir. From International Relations Specialist Dr. Mohammed Osman, thank you for joining us here on News. And now we go back to Sanlafi in our...
Thank you, Rihim. And the Netanyahu has announced that the current deputy head of Israel's security agency will as an acting until a permanent head is appointed. Netanyahu is continuing interviews with candidates for the position, including those he previously interviewed. According to the government's timeline, the position of Shabak head cannot be filled by April the 10th. Netanyahu also reversed his earlier decision to appoint former naval commander Eli Shavit as head of the internal security. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appeared in Tel Aviv's Central Court to respond to corruption charges. This marked his 21st appearance since December the 10th. The court, which meets twice a week, is hearing Netanyahu's defense against charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in cases known as Files 1000, 2000, and 4000. Netanyahu is accused of receiving gifts from businessmen and negotiating favorable media coverage in exchange for political favors. Israeli opposition leader Lapid has launched a sharp attack on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, asserting that Israel is being governed in an unmanageable manner. Lapid stated that the issue is not a deep state, but rather the absence of a functioning state, stressing the urgent need for elections. Meanwhile, Netanyahu withdrew his nomination of former Admiral Eli Shavit as head of the Shin Bet just 24 hours after announcing it, sparking further criticism of his leadership.
No current event, no government even.
And now we move on to the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
The Lebanese army has reported that Israeli forces opened fire on its soldiers as they worked to remove dirt barriers in the southern town of El Adisiyah, attempting to force them to retreat. Despite the attack, Lebanese troops continued their operation, reinforcing their positions. Meanwhile, Israeli warplanes conducted low-altitude flights over Beirut, coinciding with loud explosions. Lebanese speaker an Israeli airstrike on Beirut's suburbs as another violation of the UN Resolution 1701. Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri has condemned Israel's airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs, calling it an attempt to undermine the UN Resolution 1701. He stated that Israel's repeated violations aim to sabotage Lebanon's security efforts. The attack, he said, is a blatant aggression against Beirut and a direct challenge to international commitments. Berri urged guarantor states of the ceasefire to compel Israel to halt its assaults and withdraw from occupied Lebanese territories. And now we move on to the latest updates in Syria. A nationwide power outage has hit Syria in the electrical system. Technical teams are working to restore electricity as quickly as possible. The Syrian Energy Ministry spokesperson confirmed the blackout was caused by multiple failures in the national grid. Authorities are restarting power plants, prioritizing key stations. Local media reports suggest an issue in high voltage lines and a shutdown at Aleppo's thermal power plant. Syrian interim President Ahmed al-Shara and the Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shaya al-Sudani have agreed to enhance security coordination to prevent threats to both nations' stability. During a phone call, they discussed strengthening bilateral ties, border security, and anti-smuggling efforts. Iraq reaffirmed support for Syria's sovereignty, while al-Shara emphasized mutual cooperation and non-interference. They stressed opening a new chapter in relations to ensure stability. And Syria has announced that international support serves as a strong incentive to continue reforms and fulfill the Syrian people's aspirations for peace and stability. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry expressed gratitude to nations and organizations backing the new government. It emphasized Syria's commitment to working with friendly states to enhance security and development, while reaffirming its readiness to cooperate with the international community for regional stability. We now move to the latest developments in the Russian-Ukraine conflict. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has announced that the U.S. is intensifying diplomatic efforts with Russia and Ukraine to resolve the conflict, with President Donald Trump personally involved. Leavitt stated that Trump has set to visit Saudi Arabia in May, and the White House support for Israel and confirmed immediate tariffs to be announced by Trump soon.
A perfect deal for the American people and the American worker, and you will all find out in about 24 hours from now.
And are the car tariffs going to go into effect on
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has stated that Russia informed the United States, the United Nations, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe that Ukraine violated the agreement prohibiting strikes on energy facilities. He emphasized that Moscow has submitted concrete proposals for the practical implementation of the Black Sea Initiative. Lavrov's remarks highlight growing tensions over ceasefire violations and diplomatic negotiations amid ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has announced plans to meet with representatives from select nations willing to support a foreign military force in Ukraine. Speaking alongside German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, he urged allies for more concrete commitments. Zelensky reiterated Kiev's openness to an unconditional ceasefire while pressing the U.S. to intensify sanctions on Russia. Meanwhile, Russia's deputy foreign minister stated Moscow is seriously reviewing U.S. proposals to end the conflict. And moving on to the Chinese Foreign Minister, Wang Yi has emphasized that China and Russia are not aligned with any bloc. Their cooperation is not aimed against any third party. He stated that both countries, as neighboring global powers, have no interest in forming alliances or engaging in confrontations. He added that the relationship based on non-alignment, non-confrontation, and not targeting others serves as a stabilizing factor in a turbulent world.
Independent separatist activities and external forces that abet and aid.
And South Korea's acting president Han Duck-soo has urged citizens to accept the Constitutional Court's decision on President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment calmly. Speaking ahead of the ruling on April the 4th, Han emphasized that any violent or of the court's verdict. Police have heightened security around the court, preparing for potential unrest. If Yoon is removed, new presidential elections must be held within 60 days. And that brings us to the end of our news bulletin, and here's what we've been covering. Israel begins ground operation on the Palestinian side of Rafah, and Katz warns of more annexation. Israel recognizes 28 new settlements in the West Bank. U.S. President Donald Trump to visit Saudi Arabia in May. And this concludes our news bulletin for the hour. And don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. And thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.